Okay, if you could take your seats, we're going to get started. Sorry for the delay due to technical issues, but we're excited to get this event on Venezuela going today. I'm Jamie Fly, CEO of Freedom House. Thanks to everyone for coming this afternoon. This year marks the 85th anniversary of Freedom House. And for 85 years, we've stood alongside those on the front lines of the struggle for freedom. We at Freedom House work on a bipartisan basis, and that commitment, which we've carried out through our 85 years, continues to define our work today. And we do our work with partners around the globe, working to advance democracy, defend human rights, and support those risking their lives in the pursuit of freedom. Venezuela has been an area that we've been quite active on for many years. For more than 15 years, we've worked alongside courageous partners in Venezuela who have been advocating for their fundamental freedoms. And while the last 6 months has presented an opportunity with the removal of dictator Nicolás Maduro, the situation on the ground, I think, as you all know, remains incredibly difficult for ordinary Venezuelans. In recent weeks, we've seen a devastating earthquake, and our thoughts at Freedom House are with all of those who have lost loved ones in Venezuela, those who have been displaced or otherwise affected by this tragedy. The earthquakes have only deepened an already severe humanitarian and economic crisis, and they've placed even greater strain on the resilience of the Venezuelan people. As we think about Venezuela's future, it's clear that there's much work ahead, and it's more than just responding to today's humanitarian needs related to the earthquake. It's about rebuilding, it's about strengthening democratic institutions, reforming the Venezuelan economy, restoring the rule of law and due process, and creating the conditions for a sustainable democratic transition. At Freedom House, we believe that an independent civil society is key to this process. They must have a seat at the table throughout those conversations, and that lasting democratic change cannot succeed without the voices of independent activists, human rights defenders, journalists, and citizens helping to shape the country's future. We're also very focused on the hundreds of political prisoners who remain imprisoned, despite some releases we have seen, and those who have been released who are facing conditional freedom and significant restrictions on their activities. There's still a great deal of work ahead to ensure that their fundamental rights are fully respected. So there's a lot to discuss this afternoon about this complex moment for Venezuela, and it's why we are so pleased to have Leopoldo López with us today to share his thoughts. Leopoldo really needs no introduction, but he's one of Venezuela's most prominent opposition leaders and democracy advocates. He served as mayor of a municipality in Caracas. He co-founded the opposition party Voluntad Popular and has spent decades working to advance a free, democratic, and prosperous Venezuela. In 2014, after calling for peaceful, nonviolent protests, he was arrested by the Maduro regime, and he spent 7 years in prison under house arrest and later in diplomatic refuge at the Spanish ambassador's residence in Caracas before escaping in 2020. Despite years of persecution, Leopoldo has remained steadfast in his commitment to democracy and human rights, and today he continues that work as co-founder of the World Liberty Congress, which brings together nonviolent pro-democracy leaders and frontline activists from around the world, and as a leading voice on Venezuela's democratic future. I'm also delighted to welcome our moderator, Dasha Burns. Dasha is Politico Playbook's chief correspondent, White House bureau chief, and host of The Conversation, which is a must-listen-to podcast with global leaders and changemakers. So with that, Dasha, Leopoldo, I invite you to the stage, and I'll turn it over to you to begin our chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you to the Freedom House folks for hosting us, and thank you, Leopoldo, for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Dasha.
I got to start with the World Cup because you live in Spain now, so congratulations are in order.
Thank you. No, it was incredible living in Spain and seeing the energy of what the World Cup can do to an entire country is just incredible. So congratulations to all the Spanish-speaking people, including the Argentinians, because it was a match between Spanish-speaking people, and that was a fantastic game. It was almost taken away but at the end, we scored.
In the end, an amazing, amazing moment. Let's talk about the most recent crisis in Venezuela brought about by these earthquakes. So many lost their lives. And as Jamie mentioned, it also revealed a lot about the state, the capacity of the country, and the humanitarian situation there. What are you hearing from people on the ground?
Well, it was a devastating earthquake, as you know, and it was not one, it was two earthquakes. And I would say that there was a third earthquake that was a state incapacity to address the crisis. For the first 3 days, there was absolutely no presence of the state. There were no members of the civil protection, there were no rescue teams. Actually, the first teams that went to the affected areas came from El Salvador and then from other countries. So it actually showed the incapacity that the state has to respond. This is a state that has fallen to address the needs of the Venezuelan people, but it was shown in a very dramatic way. And there was actually not even communication. There was not even an official spokesperson telling the Venezuelan people what was happening during those critical hours. So the entire country was left alone, and that, I think, created a very big impact on the loneliness of the Venezuelan people with respect of the capacity of the state to do something to protect them.
So, I mean, what does that reveal about the current state, the current leadership, and where the gaps really are, the most critical gaps when it comes to the everyday lives of everyday people?
I think the earthquake showed in a very dramatic moment that the state had no capacity, but we have been seeing that for years. If you go to hospitals in Venezuela, there is absolutely no capacity to address the health care of the Venezuelan people. If you go to any of the institutions, there is no capacity. Venezuela has been managing a hyperinflation, inflation. We've been going from hyperinflation to inflation for the past 10 years. And this just shows incapacity to manage the economy. And if you go to any of the areas where the state should be protecting the Venezuelan people, there is absolute incapacity. Where the only area where they were good at was repressing the Venezuelan people. And that's where they put the resources. That's the only aspect of the Venezuelan state where you saw new machinery, new uniforms, new capacity, new technology in giving the repressive state the capacity to go after regular individuals for posting in social media, for saying something publicly, even from saying something privately, they would go to prison. So it just shows a failed state that has destroyed the country. Venezuela has suffered the largest contraction of the economy in recent economic history worldwide. The GDP of Venezuela reached a contraction of almost 80%. Almost 80%. So the Venezuela GDP at one point was over $400 billion, and now it's around $70 to $75 billion. And it got to 60. So that gives you an idea of the destruction that has taken place in Venezuela. For years now, we've been living what the experts called a complex humanitarian crisis. And what that means is that nothing works. In a country that sits in the largest reserves of oil and gas, there is not oil production. Sometimes there is gasoline shortage. In a country that has huge capacity to generate electricity, there are shortages of electricity of 8 to 12 hours per day in many regions of the city. In a country that could provide fresh water, not just to our entire population, but we can even export fresh water, in maybe 70% of the population doesn't have access to running water. So this goes to show the complete collapse of the state capacity that was shown in a very dramatic and sad moment that was the earthquake.
Well, as you said, there was a complex humanitarian crisis for years. Now there's a very acute humanitarian crisis in the wake of these earthquakes. And it is hard to believe that it's been 6 months since the capture and removal of Maduro. And I know there were a lot of celebrations, both here in the US and in Venezuela when that happened. However, the regime has not been dismantled. And how do you see the window of hope that's been opened up by the removal of Maduro but also the reality that we witnessed in the wake of these earthquakes, that this government has not yet come anywhere near to building up the capacity to care for its citizens in this way.
So I think it's very clear that Delcy Rodriguez and the people around her are capable of taking Venezuela to the next stage of what we hope in terms of democracy and in terms of the economy. So to your question about the capture of Maduro. Maduro was captured 6 months ago, and I think the most obvious thing to say about that is that we are much better off than what we were 6 months ago. And I think it might be very obvious, but it's the truth. I mean, we, having removed Maduro, having captured Maduro, having Maduro today facing justice in the Southern District of New York is huge. And it's huge from a justice perspective, moral, and for the potential for change. However, we are not where we want to be. We are better off than what we were in January the 2nd. We are not where we want to be. Where do we want to be? We want to be in a fully democratic and free Venezuela. And we are not there. Delcy Rodriguez is still in power with the same people that were with her when she was the vice president of Nicolás Maduro. But there has been a transition that has started. And that transition, I think, has different layers. And let me give you an example of one layer. There's been already, in my view, a geopolitical transition in Venezuela. What does that mean? Well, up until January the 2nd, Venezuela was under the influence of China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, the narcos. And I can give you examples of how China was involved in the financing and infrastructure, how Iran was involved in the energy sector, how Russia was involved for many years with the military and with the kleptocratic network, how Cuba was involved for years in the social control mechanisms. So that has changed dramatically. Now we are under the influence, guidance of the United States. It's shifted, but it's a transition from where we were to where we are now. Then there is another layer of that transition, the legal transition. They have made some attempts in trying to shape the legal structure of Venezuela in order to bring investment to the countries, particularly in oil and gas. So immediately after Maduro was captured, Delcy Rodriguez and her brother, who manages at the legitimate assembly that was elected in 26, they drafted and approved a new hydrocarbons law. It's a law that is better than the law that it used to be there, but it's not enough. And every company, CEO, technical team that is going to Venezuela to look at the oil and gas energy sector will tell you that there are still some holes, that there is still uncertainty. So that legal transition is still short of what it's needed in order to have a solid grounding for a stable horizon for 10 to 15 years, which is the horizon that these companies need in order to deploy the type of investment that is needed to increase the oil production, to take advantage of the natural gas, to take advantage of our energy and other sectors of the economy. Until that happens, the potential will not arrive.
So transition is one of three phases that the State Department, Marco Rubio, of course, the Secretary of State, has been very involved in this, and he laid out this three-phase framework: stabilization, recovery, and transition. Where are each of those phases right now? Because he also said it's not necessarily sequential, like all three of those phases could be sort of happening at the same time.
Well, so as Secretary Rubio said, January the 3rd, when Maduro was captured, that going forward there were going to be three phases: stabilization, economic recovery, and transition. And the U.S. government, through different voices, they have stated in recent days that transition means elections. And I think that is good, that it's important. It was said by Michael Kozak, who was giving testimony at Senate last week, and also another representative of the State Department who was at the House. And Marco Rubio today also reaffirmed that transition means elections. And I believe that that is good. So how do we get to that election? Well, in order to get to that election, we need a new electoral board, a new CNE, as we call it in Venezuela. Why? Well, because the one that is today in place stole the election. That election was won by Edmundo González because María Corina Machado was not able to run. Edmundo González won, and the democratic sector that we've been doing this for years, we're able to go to every single voting center and prove in 2024 that election was won by Edmundo Gonzalez with 70% of the vote. However, that night of the election, in a napkin, the results were given to the president of the electoral board, and he said that Maduro had won. Nobody believed him. The international community, of course, didn't believe him because there were elements of proof otherwise, and the Venezuelan people knew that that was not the case. So that's the first step, to have a new electoral board that will call for an election, I would hope, in the shortest time frame. But more than talking about when will the election take place, I think it's important to talk about what are the necessary conditions for that election to take place.
Well, that's a great point, because the question about when, you first have to have the infrastructure in place. I mean, how long do you think it would take Venezuela to build that infrastructure, to get a new board, and what needs to be done from international partners to make sure that that happens, and to make sure that elections, when they do happen in Venezuela, are free and fair?
Well, I think that, as I said before, the first step is to call for a new electoral board. And we're in the process of doing that. There is a process promoted, again, by the U.S., to have the National Assembly of 2015 to engage in a conversation with the National Assembly of 2026 with a very concrete agenda to decide on a new electoral board that will then make sure that all the political parties are legalized, that all of the potential candidates could run, that the people that should be able to vote are able to register to vote, that the media ecosystem is open enough for that election to happen, and of course to audit the electoral system. The electoral system in Venezuela has been a black box for many years, and that's part of what also needs to happen. But when will that happen? That clock will start ticking when the new electoral board is elected. So until that's the most important point to get to, and I hope that that happens in 2026. So we should end 2026 with a new electoral board.
Do you think you will?
I hope so, yes. I think we will.
Those of us that are here in Washington feel the whiplash every single day of the different headlines, both domestic but increasingly international. I mean, this administration is involved in all over the world. Right now, Iran is escalating. How much, in your engagement with the administration, with Congress, with leaders here in Washington, do you feel that there is appetite and bandwidth to focus on Venezuela?
Well, I think Venezuela has the attention of the administration and of people at Senate and the House. I think it's true. I mean, what happened in Venezuela is very significant. I think it could be one of the most impactful, effective military operations in the history of the United States. And I think that for the interest of everyone in the U.S., that needs to land where it needs to land, which is in a free, democratic, and prosperous, and a growing economy of Venezuela. I think that's in the interest of everyone.
Well, the president is very proud of the operation in Venezuela. I mean, he touts it all the time in just about every speech that I've heard him give recently. He's gotten Venezuela to this point. He's seeing it as a model for potentially what he wants to do in Iran, what he maybe wants to do in Cuba. But what more do you want from President Trump, from the administration, for him to really be able to say, I made a historic legacy driving impact in Venezuela?
Well, I think the legacy of what happened on January the 3rd, which actually didn't start on January the 3rd, because in Trump 1, there was also the maximum pressure towards the regime. And that was part of the buildup towards January the 3rd. So the attention of Trump and his administration on Venezuela didn't start with his second term. It started with his first term. Then different things happened. COVID came and different things happened. So I think to the credit of President Trump and to his administration, Venezuela has been front and center in the priorities. And we believe that is good. And the Venezuelan people recognize and appreciate that because for many years we knew what we were facing. This is not new, that Venezuela was a problem, not just to the United States, but to the entire region. Some people say that Venezuela is all about oil. Well, there is oil is important, but it's not just about oil. It's always been there for the past 100 years. So the interest in Venezuela through oil, it's always been there. But Venezuela was impacting the region in different ways. Venezuela was impacting the region through migration. It was very underreported, the fact that Venezuela was the largest migration crisis in the planet, not in the hemisphere, in the planet. 1/3 of the Venezuelan population were expelled, had to leave our country. That's almost 10 million people of a population of 30 million. And of course, that impacted all of the region. 3 million people, almost 3 million people were in Colombia, and that was tremendous. And the same went for Ecuador, for Chile, for Argentina, and of course for the US and Central America. So that was happening, and it was going to continue to happen unless something happened. Then on the drugs and the drug trafficking, for years it has been known in this city, and it has been reported that Venezuela was a pass-through of a large proportion of the cocaine that was being produced in Colombia. And there were even some reports that the narco industry in Venezuela even got vertically integrated from the plantations all the way to commerce. I don't know to what extent, but that was also reported. So if narcotics and going against the narcos was a priority, Venezuela was also one of the countries to address. And then the political influence, the negative political influence that for years Venezuela had been funding different groups from Nicaragua to all of the countries in South America. They were receiving support funds to destabilize democratic countries in the region. So for many different reasons, Venezuela was creating negative impact in the region and in the hemisphere. And I believe that making the hemisphere a priority, it's also a very important step. And I think, to my surprise, and I think it should be to the surprise of everyone, seeing what has happened over the past 20 years under the eyesight of the U.S., different administrations, China's influence in the region grew tremendously. 20 years ago, the main trade partner for almost every single Latin American country was the United States. Today, the main trading partner for almost every single Latin American country is China. And they are controlling ports. They are controlling way-arounds. So this is also another piece of the entire shift in the priority. And I think that's positive. I think it's very positive that there is a priority to the Western Hemisphere, and that the Western Hemisphere now is being thought as a geopolitical priority, as an energy priority, and also it needs to be a democratic priority for the region.
We're at Freedom House. Let's talk about freedom, especially for the political prisoners that are still in Venezuela. Hundreds have been released. Hundreds are still imprisoned. And as we talk about this, and I know it's not the most pleasant memory lane to go down, but if you could speak to the people here about what it actually means that Venezuela still has hundreds of people in prison.
No, thank you for asking that, because going into January the 3rd, there were 1,200 political prisoners, and there are still 500 political prisoners. So the bright side to this is 700 political prisoners who were released. That's very positive. Many of my friends that were in prison are now free, and we're happy for that. But there is absolutely no reason why there should be 500 political prisoners today. And I think that this is something that the U.S. administration, that is having tremendous levels of influence in Venezuela in many different areas, of course, in the economy, on the politics, in geopolitics, on the military. We can talk about that as well. I think that they should make it a priority that in the next weeks they release all prisoners, because that will give, I think, credibility to the process. There is no reason why 500 Venezuelans, men, women, civilians, and military should be imprisoned now.
Let's talk about what Washington can do here. As you've spent time with, I'm sure, a number of officials here and organizations, civil society, what do you want to see out of this town, the powers in this town, to help move Venezuela into that future that you want to see for your country?
Well, I would like to see that everyone thinking about Venezuela and the hemisphere understands that the success of Venezuela is a prosperous and democratic Venezuela, and that there won't be prosperity in the long term if there is no democracy. And I believe that everyone from different aspects should be pushing in that direction. So I think that the energy agenda it's very important, but it would be incomplete without an institutional and a democratic agenda. And I think the security and the military agenda is very important, but also the democracy agenda is it's important. Venezuela is different than other countries that the U.S. has been engaged militarily. Venezuela has a history of democracy. We had more than 40 years of democracy. And for the past 20 years, we have been taking the streets calling for democracy. We have an idea of what we want because we had it, we lost it, and we want it again better. We want a better democracy. We want a democracy that suits our expectations of what was taken away from the Venezuelan people. I think it's not sustainable to have a long-term situation where there is no transition to democracy. Delcy Rodriguez won't provide stability in the medium and long term. She just won't be able to. And I understand why the transition happened from within, but she won't be able to sustain stability and long-term planning for Venezuela. And the reason is very simple. She was the vice president of Maduro. The people around her are the same people that have been around Chavez and around Maduro for 2 decades. And they have collapsed the country. They are the people responsible for destroying the economy, for throwing the country into a complex humanitarian crisis. So they are not the people called to rebuild the country. And
who is then, and what is the current state of the opposition movement? How are the different factions organizing? What are you all doing to get there?
Well, I think that's for the people to decide, right? And we were able to. So for decades, we've been taking the streets for the call of free and fair elections. I mean, and this is what has taken millions of people to the streets for years. I even did a hunger strike for 28 days in 2015, and I started when I was in prison. Almost 100 other prisoners supported, and maybe 50 or 60 people outside went into that hunger strike. Our petition was to have an election that year, and that's a year we had the election for the National Assembly. So this is what needs to happen, which is giving the Venezuelan people the possibility to decide. And this is at different levels. We need new council members. We need new mayors. We need new governors. We need a new National Assembly. Of course, we need a new cabinet and a new president. We need new authorities of the universities. We need new authorities of the unions, we need to democratize Venezuela. And that cannot happen in a week. I mean, it's a process. But the process will be successful if we have the right sight on getting there. If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. So if we want to get to a Venezuela that is fully democratic and prosperous, well, that's the ladder that we need to start to climb.
It does sound like a big, steep ladder, and you've laid out a lot of challenges. You've laid out what needs to happen. That does sound difficult. What gives you hope, even with the obstacles that you've laid out today?
Well, I'm a structural optimist, right? So you wouldn't be in this business of fighting against dictatorships if you're not an optimist. You have to be an idealist. And many of the people that have suffered imprisonment, that many of the people that have suffered exile, and some of our friends that have been killed, they were killed for an idea. They were killed for the idea of living in a free and democratic Venezuela. So that's the attitude that we have and that we need to continue to have. But what really gives me hope is the Venezuelan people, because the Venezuelan people want to live in a free, democratic, and prosperous Venezuela. And that's very clear. And I ask any of you to talk to any Venezuelan inside or outside Venezuela and ask them, what do they want? And they will tell you, we want to live in a free, democratic, and prosperous Venezuela. And we all know that Delcy won't be able to provide that. And I think that we all know that we are in a process. A transition, by definition, is a process. A transition, I mean, the capture of Maduro is not that Maduro lost an election and that there needs to be, someone else by the next day. It's a transition, and we need to work with our allies, and our main ally it's the United States government that took the risk of going into Venezuela, capturing Maduro, and unlocking the potential of the phase in which we're in. And for that, we're grateful. For that, we are very grateful. And I think that the region needs to engage. I think the OAS needs to engage. I think that the entire continent should engage in a very constructive way to see how this process can be a solid process that can, as we said before, it's not just the democratic aspect, but it's also the economic recovery, that they go hand in hand. There won't be an economic recovery if there is no clarity on what's going to happen with the institutions. I mean, and this is very clear. No company is going to invest in Venezuela the level of capital deployment that is needed for many of these projects if there is no clarity what will happen in Venezuela in 5, 10 to 15 years. So building that horizon of stability is a priority.
I have one more question for you, but while I ask it, I'd love any of you that have questions for Leopoldo to line up behind this microphone, and I'll get some questions from our audience here. My final question to you is just, what is your message to Venezuelans, both living in Venezuela and the many, as you mentioned, that are living abroad?
Well, the message to Venezuela is that we should continue to build this process, that everyone is part of this process, to continue to believe. We have believed for many years. It's been tough. It's been tough because we've been very, very close, to put it in baseball terms. Many times we've been in third base, but it was very hard to go, to score at home. Now we
put it in football terms.
Well, I should have, yeah. I should have put in, well, we're here in the U.S., right? So I wanted to be respectful. And by the way, let me just to show how much this priority in the Western Hemisphere is natural for Venezuela. We won the World Championship of Baseball against the U.S. We play baseball. That's our national sport. So Venezuela naturally, it's part of the sphere of influence of the Western Hemisphere and the U.S. We also play football. We still have not been able to make it to the World Cup, but we will. And I'm sure that that's part of what will happen in the new Venezuela.
All right, let's take some questions from our audience here.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is, what is your assessment on how the removal of Maduro and the U.S. involvement has affected the grip that Cuba has or has had on Venezuela's military repressive system? Mm-hmm. And the second one is, how do you think the repressive system that exists under Diosdado Cabello can be dealt with?
No, thank you very much. No, thank you very much. And thank you for that question, because it's a very, very important one. Because that needs to happen, and it needs to happen. That needs to start now. We need to start dismantling the repressive state. What do I call the repressive state? The repressive state is the structure that has three pillars. The first pillar is the legal pillar of repression. There are laws in place today in Venezuela that penalize speech, that criminalize NGOs. So NGOs can be criminalized. Their members can go to prison for receiving funds from the private sector or from individuals or organizations outside Venezuela. There are laws that prevent freedom of speech. So that legal pillar has to be dismantled. There is no excuse. And I think that this should be part of the agenda of the U.S., dismantling the repressive state. The second pillar of that repressive state are the judges and the prosecutors. There is not a single independent judge in Venezuela. I'll give you my own example. I was sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment, and according to the judge, my crime was sending subliminal messages to the Venezuelan people. And I was sentenced to 14 years. I served 7. And I had no possibility of presenting a single element of proof or a single witness. But I had the opportunity of even having a fake trial. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people that spent years in prison that they even had the chance to go to a trial. And those people are still in place. Those same judges are still in place. They need to be removed. That should be a priority. And the third pillar is one that you're mentioning, is the operative capacity of the repressive state that is being led by Diosdado Cabello. Diosdado Cabello is today the Minister of Interior. He has held all of the positions over the past 25 years. And he is the head, the mastermind, and the executor of the repression in Venezuela. And he is indicted by the U.S. There is an indictment on Diosdado Cabello, and there is a reward of $25 million for Diosdado Cabello. So I think that the dismantling of these three pillars of the repressive state is something that should happen, and it should start now. It should be part of the policy of the United States, because yes, we want elections. Yes, we want that very important milestone, but we cannot and should not wait until that milestone of the election to start advancing in the different aspects of the transition. And the dismantling of the repressive state, in my opinion, is one of the big priorities.
And just really quickly to her first question about the impact of Maduro's capture on Cuba's grip in the region. Well,
I think it made it very clear. First, it made it very clear that the U.S., this administration is serious. That it's not just a credible threat, that they are willing to execute on a credible threat. And what I hope is that opens the possibility for a transition in Cuba, that I believe it should happen, and I believe it should happen before the end of the year. And I think that the conditions in Cuba are ripe for change. I mean, in the same way that 90% of Venezuelans were very happy with the capture of Maduro, I think that 90 to 95% of Cubans will be very happy if there is a transition in Cuba that opens the possibility for what Cubans have always dreamed for, which is also being freed from this regime.
And please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Sure. Emily Helscher, and I'm so sorry, my question also has to do with Diosdado Cabello. So I noticed online he's really weaponized the internet to give a very anti-democratic narrative, which causes people to redirect their anger at the opposition, supposedly instead of the regime. But most of these are bots and trolls. But upon repetition, some ordinary people start repeating it. Is there a way to reinstitute democratic norms and show people you don't have to be afraid to like pluralism, like multiple leaders, and that all the leaders are part of the same struggle? And we need to restore memory in the opposition, because a lot of the opposition leaders throughout the years have done incredible things. And is there also a way to restore what was taken for various leaders, such as property, citizenship, as well as personal belongings, and to have part of its transition be to both restore memory, restore reputations of those damaged by a disinformation campaign, and restore personal property and citizenship as well? And thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. And you're totally right that one of the areas that has been greatly influenced over all of these years was the censorship, and then the manipulation of the social media. And this is not only the case for Venezuela, but I've seen it because of my role in the World Liberty Congress, which is an alliance of freedom fighters and democracy defenders worldwide. And what we see in every autocratic country is that they go into the social media space to manipulate, to intoxicate, to spread fake news, to smear campaigns, to target individuals. It's especially hard on women, by the way, globally. It's been especially hard on women also in Venezuela. So part of what needs to happen, and this takes me back to my previous point, another quick win, and I'll number them. 1, release of political prisoners. 2, the dismantling of the repressive state. And 3 is the opening of the civic space. And that means opening up the possibility for free speech in Venezuela. There were not, up until January the 3rd, there were not a single TV station, not a single radio station that could speak freely or release news freely. Now there are some that are saying some things, but not entirely. If you speak to journalists in Venezuela, they are still scared. They are still, I mean, actually there were some journalists that were detained, not for days, but only for some minutes a couple of weeks ago. So this is another quick win that, under the support of the U.S., should be part of the agenda, opening the civic space, opening the freedom of speech.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Leopoldo, hi. My name is Rafael Struve. I'm a Venezuelan American. I'm working on Capitol Hill. My principal actually is from Florida. So as you can imagine, our delegation looks very, very closely at policy in the region. My question has to do with this one, of course, is very, very close to home for me. Has to do with the fact that you lived the difference between removing a man and changing a system. Back in 2019, we saw that there was a very strong push from the United States to oust Nicolás Maduro. Rightfully so. We had a strong coalition of backers to support the interim president, Juan Guaidó. So my question is, when you look back at that period and where we're at now, what do you think, in your experience and in your opinion, we in Washington, the United States, and the international coalition got right? What is it that we got wrong? And what is it that you're hoping to change or will change this time around so that this transition actually has a lasting and permanent effect?
No, thank you. Thank you for your question. A very good one. So what happened in 2019 was the beginning of what ended up happening in January 3rd of 2026. And let me just explain why I say this. In 2019, the Trump 1 administration, they recognized Juan Guaidó as the interim president because the Constitution of Venezuela said so. It's not something that was brewed and cooked here in Washington, D.C. The Venezuelan Constitution states that if the president doesn't swear in to the National Assembly, then the president of the National Assembly becomes the interim president. And in 2018, Maduro stole his second election, because Maduro stole 3 elections. He first stole the first election after Chavez died in 2013. And actually, in the speech that President Trump gave recently, he made a reference to this. Then he stole the election in 2018. But because we had the majority of the National Assembly, we knew that Maduro was not going to show up to the National Assembly. So this Article 322 gave a window to recognize an interim president. And it was Juan Guaidó who became interim president. And that gave way to the maximum pressure campaign. That was, well, now it doesn't look like maximum, and when you compare it to what happened on January the 3rd and what happened to the months before that. But that maximum campaign back then was sanctions were imposed. Venezuela, Maduro was not recognized by the U.S., by Canada, by almost 60 countries. There were assets frozen to the Venezuelan regime, and there were several cases opened against Maduro. That's what led to the indictment of Maduro. And the indictment of Maduro in 2020 by Trump 1 is what led to the capture of Maduro in January the 3rd, because you might remember Secretary Rubio saying several times that the capture of Maduro was a law enforcement operation. And it was a law enforcement operation because it was the capture of an indicted individual, not a recognized head of state. And it was not a recognized head of state because legally the U.S. never ceased to recognize the president of the National Assembly as the president. So after Juan Guaidó left the National Assembly, Dinora Figuera became the president of the National Assembly and became legally, to the eyes of the U.S. legal system, the legitimate president of Venezuela. And that's what allowed the capture of Maduro on legal grounds. And that's the way it was explained several times by Secretary Rubio. So what went right back then? I think pointing to the direction that there had to be pressure. I think that was right. And I think that had to continue. Then came the Biden administration, and there was a different approach. It was not maximum, but minimum pressure. We always said that we had tried everything. And I want to make this clear. I'm sure many of you are are knowledgeable of Venezuela. But we got to this point after doing absolutely everything for many years. We took the streets, not once, but thousands of times, not with hundreds, but almost with millions of people. We went to elections. Elections were stolen. We engaged in 16 rounds of negotiations with all of the mediators that you can think. The head of the OAS, the Pope, ex-presidents, the Norwegians, and it all failed. Why? Because they never had the intention to really engage, because there was no real pressure. There were sanctions imposed to Maduro. There was diplomatic pressure, and none of that was able to reach the removal of Maduro, because it had to happen the way it happened. And I think that's the way, in one way or another, it will be the way it will happen in Cuba. And I think that the same way that the Venezuelan people supported that happened, more than 80% of the Venezuelan people supported the capture of Maduro. And sometimes people, I have heard the argument, and especially I hear this argument in Europe, that they say, well, the Maduro capture is violating international law. And when I hear this, I say, really? What international law are you talking about? Where was the international law when Maduro killed 20,000 people? Where was the international law when Maduro imprisoned tens of thousands of people? Where was the international law where Maduro destroyed the economy and threw the country into a complex humanitarian crisis? So all of these are more excuses, almost titles, almost like headlines of trying to just be against President Trump because of what he did, or just maybe hiding their maybe sympathy to dictators like Maduro. So yes, we support what happened, and I think that this is not just supported by the Venezuelan people, but it's supported by those who believe that human rights, freedom, democracy should be respected and promoted.
Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Viola Ginger. I'm a Washington senior editor for justsecurity.org. We publish legal and policy analysis. Thank you for your remarks about independent media, and I'd welcome anything you want to add about the capacity of independent media in Venezuela today and what you see going forward. And also, in all of your interactions with U.S. officials and others in the United States, what is your sense of how committed the United States is to a genuine democratic transition and to dismantling those elements of repression that you discussed?
Well, I think that there is commitment. I mean, and I think it's very clear. I mean, that commitment was shown on January the 3rd. I understand that we want things to happen immediately, and we want that transition to happen in the right way as fast as possible. But the expression of the commitment is there, the capture of Maduro. And now, of course, we need to make sure that those three phases that were laid out, especially phase 3, that is transition, lands in the right place. There will be the beginning of conversations between the National Assembly of 2015 and 2026, August 1st. Secretary Rubio made reference to that today. He's committing personally to the success of this process. So, of course, I have to think that this is being taken seriously, because it's being said by the highest authorities of the U.S. government, and I think that this is where it has to go. Venezuela won't be a success case if it doesn't transition to democracy. So it needs to happen. It needs to happen in the right way, with the right conditions, and with the right companionship to this process. And with respect to the media, what else needs to happen? Well, first is to condemn all of the violations of censorship that continue to happen in Venezuela today. I think that should be a priority to the U.S. government and to all of the ecosystem in the Americas to watch out for what's happening with freedom of expression. Let me tell a personal anecdote. I remember at the beginning of the Chavez era, people talking about freedom of expression. At the time, I didn't really think that this was important. And that sometimes I even thought, well, you know, this is a narrative of journalists or of people from the media. But until you have complete censorship, you don't understand how the freedom of expression is oxygen to freedom. Without freedom of expression, there can be no freedom. because freedom is not one thing. Freedom is a sum of many things. And I think that this is also important. It's a great opportunity to support independent journalists, to support people in the ground, to support different expressions of people doing investigative journalism, to support students of journalism that could be in Venezuela, could go to Venezuela and do things. And I know Freedom House has different programs around this area of freedom of expression, which is very important. So thank you for your question.
To follow up on that, what is the current capacity of independent media in Venezuela if the censorship issue of free expression were sanctioned, and what is the access for everyday Venezuelans to that information?
So Venezuelans, this is the way Venezuelans digest news. The first source of news is WhatsApp. The second source is Instagram. The third source is TikTok. The fourth source is TV. The fifth is radio. And the sixth or seventh is X. And that's the way Venezuelan people get informed. And as you can see, press doesn't exist, by the way. Like written press, it doesn't exist. That's a dinosaur of the past. It's just completely vanished. There are no kiosks. Nobody prints press anymore in Venezuela. So that's what's happening now. And I think that needs to evolve into a independent media hubs that are true to this new reality of social media and the new ways of expression. But the most important thing is that free speech is not criminalized. Because if free speech is truly free, people will find ways of making sure that their opinions, their news, their researchers get out there. And I think that this is a huge space of growth for the civic space in Venezuela.
All right, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Pascual Hernando from Venezuela, living here for 7 years, political activist in Venezuela, asylum, grant asylum, thank you, United States. Just we as a Venezuelan, one of our first concern is like what happened if the current administration get ending and nothing happened in Venezuela. We are totally grateful with this current administration, but at the same time, we are really skeptical with the situation right now because we don't find any sense to say like everyone is dancing on the street in Venezuela, but it's not true. So at the same time, we are totally, as I said before, concerned whether if this administration get in 2028 and the regime is still in power. So my message for fellow U.S. citizens is if you as a country you can bring a kind of small prosperity to another country, is worthy, such as Cuba or Venezuela. That's it. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think that it's what I've tried to say several times today, that the only way that this process that started many years ago, that had an important milestone in January the 3rd, that the way it can be sustainable and they can be positive is if it ends up transitioning to democracy. And again, I think that the steps are being taken in order to make that happen. We will have a new electoral board. We will have elections. And the Venezuelan people will have a say, as it has to be, because Venezuelan people are the ones that should decide who should be governing the country. And I believe that is going to happen before 2028.
How much does the U.S. electoral process, whether it's what we have coming up with the midterms that could change the makeup of Congress, or 2028, where you will see a new administration, potentially Republican, potentially Democratic, how much does that factor in, weigh on the minds of people like yourself?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's entering in the realm of speculation. I
guess that's my question, is how much are people speculating?
Well,
what
people do.
If then that?
I think people speculate, but I also think that the case of Venezuela is very bipartisan. And it has been for years. And I think that this is very important. And I'll give you an example. When Juan Guaido came to the State of the Union, the first person that stood up and gave a standing ovation was Nancy Pelosi. And so it was very bipartisan. And I have seen that bipartisan support. The reality is that it has been President Trump, the one that's taken the steps. And I think that we need to recognize that.
Support, right?
But there is a bipartisan.
Change.
Yeah, but it is a bipartisan, at least in terms of the narrative, in terms of the commitment. Of course, both parties could have a different approach to what could be the priorities and what could be the intensity of one or the other issue. But I think that the change is here to stay. I don't see any possibility, and I hope not, that Venezuela will go back to the scenario where China, Russia, Iran, the narcos, and Cuba, go back into Venezuela and capture the territory, the state, the business networks. And I don't see that happening under any administration, because I think that the U.S., after 27 years, understood that they paid, or the region paid, a very high price for looking to the other side, because that's what happened. For many years, we came to the city talking about the influence of the narcos in Venezuela. For many years, we came to the city talking about the influence of Cuba, of Russia, of Iran, even of Hezbollah. I remember coming to the city saying Hezbollah has presence in Venezuela, and they would tell us, no, you're crazy, you're exaggerating. And now we know it was true. It was not in the form that many people would think, a training camp with an AK-47. No, Hezbollah was in Venezuela for at least the past 15 years because Venezuela was a money laundering infrastructure for these terrorist organizations. And also the narcos from Colombia, from Mexico. There are places in Venezuela that are called Sinaloita because they are controlled by the cartel of Sinaloa. And this is the reality. And I don't see that anyone, having looked at the consequences of not doing anything for many, many years, will allow for these rogue and negative actors to go back into Venezuela. And of course, the Venezuelan people, we know that we need to safeguard, to strengthen our institutions, our rule of law, our democracy, our commitment to the country that we want, which is, as I said before, free, democratic, and prosperous.
All right, we'll just take a couple more. Please introduce.
Hi, my name is Erin. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I wanted to ask a little bit about opposition leadership and what you view specifically as the key role of opposition leaders, both inside Venezuela right now and those who remain outside, and what types of engagement you perceive has been most effective to date.
Well, there are plenty of us that have been in forced exile, and I think all of us should be able to go back to Venezuela. I'll give you my personal case since you asked. 6 months ago, I supported publicly what the Trump administration was doing. And this was December of last year. They went into my house, they stole everything, then they destroyed my house, they killed my dogs, and then they took away my nationality. And the killing of the dogs and the destroying of the house and taking away the nationality was Delcy Rodriguez. So it's not something that happened under Maduro. And this is a clear threat to many of us who are in exile. And I think that Maria Corina Machado, who has been leading the democratic process over the past years, she needs to go back to Venezuela. And she has stated that she wants to go back, and she has said recently that that is her intention. And I think that that is positive, that not just her, but everyone that wants to go back, we should be able to go back. Because if you have a country where, democratic leaders, whoever they are not able to go back, of course, things are just showing that the repressive state is still in place. And that goes back to the quick wins that I said before, the dismantling of the repressive state being one of them. The second question that you asked is, how do we articulate amongst ourselves? Well, I've had the opportunity to get to know many other countries and the dynamics within the opposition and democratic movements. And when I compare the case of Venezuela to others in the region and even outside the continent, Venezuelan opposition has shown that despite our differences, in moments of intense necessity, we come together. And I'll give you examples. We came together in 2012. We did a primary to elect a single candidate and 24 candidates for the governorships and 335 candidates for municipalities. Then we did the same in 2015. We built an alliance of more than 20 political parties, and we won 2/3 of the National Assembly. Then in 2014, we went to the election, we went to the protests, and we did that together. Then in 2017, the protests that took place was also supported by all sectors of the Democratic opposition. And going forward, 2023, there were some differences, and we did a primary, and we elected the winner of that primary was Maria Corina Machado. So that started a new phase. And then she was banned to run for office. And in unity, we decided to support Edmundo Gonzalez, and he won the election. What I'm trying to show with this, with facts, not with gossip, not with hearsay, with facts, is that the Venezuelan opposition, when the time comes, we are able to work together, because we know that the stakes are way higher than the individual agendas of any of our parties, of our movements.
All right, one last question.
Thanks so much. My name is Anna Sineva. I do government relations here as part of a big multi-faith coalition. First of all, thank you for your courage, and it's a tremendous testimony. I wanted to ask you about the controversial topic of sanctions. It seems that in the US and with some of our allied countries, it's an easy and quick political solution a lot of times to pass a whole package of sanctions to punish a whole country for the violations of their regime. Do you consider that that's helpful, productive, counterproductive? Would love to hear your opinion.
So thanks for your question. It's a very important one. I don't think that there is an either-or answer to that. I think the case of sanctions has to be made alongside with the implementation of sanctions, because part of the big problem of sanctions is the implementations. They are announced and then they are not implemented in the right way. You have problems of enforcement of many of those sanctions. And then you have over-compliance because there is no clarity on what the sanctions could affect. So you have over-compliance from parts of the economy that are affected by sanctions. So a short answer to your questions, I believe in sanctions. I believe that they are a tool that needs to be used. I believe that they can be effective in different aspects. But I also believe that there needs to be a lot of thought put into the infrastructure and the implementation and the follow-up to whenever sanctions are imposed by Congress or by the executive. There needs to be a follow-up, and that's where I see the crack in the system.
All right. Thank you all for your engagement, for your presence, for your excellent questions. Thank you, Freedom House, and thank you, of course, Leopoldo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.